In other news, the Jewish and Israeli relationship with Christian Evangelicals has a long history, which today is one of vigilant support. But following the recent uptick of clashes with terror groups in Gaza and a change in Israel's administration, these same ties can sometimes seem more delicate. So, what's the state of relations today? Here to break it all down is pro-Israel Christian advocate Lily Sironi. Lily, thanks so much for coming in today.
Absolutely, thank you.
It's my pleasure. All right, so I have to ask you, let's begin with the Israeli-Jewish Christian evangelical relationship, really. How did it come to be so strong, especially in the recent century?
Yeah, so basically what we see today as modern evangelicals, that history goes all the way back to Martin Luther and the Reformation. Even though in his later years he was a pretty intense anti-Semite, in the beginning his Reformation allowed Christians around the world to actually read the Bible, which is important because before that, whatever the interpretation of the priests were, because the Bible was not in the common language, was kind of taken as fact. And a lot of that was anti-Semitism about, how the Jews are trying to control society, all these terrible anti-Semitic tropes that we hear still today. And so really with that freedom of information came Christians reading the word and realizing that it's all about God's faithfulness to the Jewish people. And so then you've seen this steady growth in Christians who read their Bible, know that God is still faithful to his people, and we as Christians should also be friends of Israel.
All right, so now in the recent flare-up in May between Israel and Hamas in Gaza, there was a sharp rise in anti-Semitism around the world. And with that, the Jews often have been reporting feeling very alone in the face of that rise. Of course, Christian supporters were there in large numbers, but what do you say about you could call it blind faith or blind support for Israel?
I think that Christians definitely have to do a better job of being vocal about their support for Israel. I think the other side is incredibly loud on the world stage, and I think Christians need to do a better job of educating themselves on the issues, making sure they know what they believe from a biblical point of view, and that they're not afraid to share it in a public space. That's the important part, is making sure that their Christian voice is heard for the Jewish people, and Jews know that they have Christian friends.
Now, recently it's been reported that the support for Israel, for the Jewish people, amongst evangelical Christians, amongst particularly the younger generation of evangelical Christian community, has actually waned. What are these reports accurate, and what are the causes?
I would say they are accurate. I think a lot of young Christians are, entering into very intense college campus atmospheres where they're being just inundated with many different social justice issues, all sorts of crises going on around the world, and the issue of Israel gets lost for them, even as Christians. And so I think they're also intimidated by what's being taught on college campuses, just a lot of anti-Semitism and anti-Israel rhetoric, and they don't have the education to back that up.
So have they turned more towards that misinformation, or are they maybe just a little bit more silent or reluctant to speak out?
I think it's both. I think they're reluctant to speak out if they don't feel well informed enough, and therefore they may as well be anti because we don't hear their voices, right? But I think there are some that are kind of buying into what's being taught on their campuses, and that's a big problem for Christian Friends of Israel.
All right, my final question for you, a prominent evangelical leader recently made a statement about Israel's new government just a couple of weeks ago. You disagree with it. Can you tell us a little bit more about why that is?
Yeah, I think the conflict about, evangelicals voicing their political opinions on the Israeli government is a problem for us because our support of Israel is not based on who is in office in Israel. Our support is biblical, meaning that it doesn't matter who's prime minister, who makes up the Knesset. Our tie and our support of the people of Israel and the state are bigger than the politics. And so I think when Christian leaders get into these nitty-gritty issues, it kind of muddies the waters for Israelis, and Christians really want Israelis and the Jews to know that we're not trying to get into the middle of their world and into the middle of their politics.
All right, well, I think you've given a lot of people all over the world a lot to think about. Lily, thank you so much for coming in.
My pleasure.